These are 10 fragrance notes I'm always a little bit wary of. Whenever I see them in a scent pyramid, I'm kind of going to proceed with caution because I don't know if I'm going to love that fragrance with these fragrance notes. If this is your first time watching my channel, hello, my name is Anya. I love fragrances. I talk about them here 5 times a week, Monday through Friday. I also do additional content on TikTok and Instagram under the username ANECHKAFRAGRANCES. And I do have a podcast called The Fragrance Report. I drop a new episode every Wednesday on Spotify. So like I said, these are going to be 10 fragrance notes, well technically 11, but there's going to be a fragrance note combination that I'm going to be referencing here that I'm not a fan of. But generally I was inspired to do this video because we're starting to, do a lot of reflection about fragrances in 2024, and I was looking at the trends that, were happening in 2024. And some of those fragrance notes or some of those trends I just did not want to see. And I was thinking about why. And then I realized I'm just not a big fan of these fragrance notes at the moment. And the thing is, some of these fragrance notes, I have them in my collection and I do love those fragrances. But when it comes to a new fragrance with these notes, I'm usually a little bit wary of it. And of course, I'm going to delve deeper into this throughout the video. But just keep in mind, this is my own personal opinion. This is my opinion when it comes to the fragrances I love and wear and gravitate towards, and this is subject to change. So the first note that I'm always wary of is cherry. And you might remember this if you've ever been watching my Smash or Pass fragrance news videos, but whenever I see a cherry fragrance, right, I'm always talking about how I'm not sure if I'm going to love this one. I'm not sure if it's going to be a fragrance that I'm going to gravitate towards, because the specific combination of cherry with amber has been so overplayed at this point. It's kind of like a alternative of Lost Cherry by Tom Ford. Like, that scent profile has been played around so much. The cherry and amber combination has been done every which way, and there are a few specific fragrance brands that have created cherry fragrances that are truly exceptional and that I still really love. And those are some fragrances that are in my collection. But other than that, it's kind of difficult, I think, to find a new fragrance release with cherry in it that actually smells unique and interesting and special. And for that reason, I always proceed with caution whenever I see a cherry fragrance note, because I'm like, I don't know if this is going to overpower things. I don't know if it's going to be an accent. I don't know if it's going to be a fragrance that's new and interesting. And I don't know if I'm going to spend my money on it if it's just going to be a cherry perfume that's been done over and over again. The next fragrance that kind of slots into the same category, and there are a few fragrance notes in this selection that will kind of be in the same category, is lychee. And keep in mind, I have a few lychee fragrances that I love, that I recommend, that I think are beautiful, but Delina and Delina Exclusive specifically have that theme when it comes to the lychee, the peony, and rose has been overplayed so much and regurgitated so much that whenever I see lychee in a fragrance, especially with florals, I always want to smell it first before making a decision to add it to my collection, because the last thing I want is another fragrance in my collection that is too close to that scent profile. Because I already have, this is completely, for the most part, unintentional, but I already have at least 5+ fragrances in my collection that adhere to that profile. And while some of those fragrances I really do love, I only really love probably one or two, and you might have seen them in recent videos. I love them, I think they're amazing. But when it comes to a new fragrance, I always proceed with caution, because I'm like, I don't want to have another version of a scent profile that I already have in my collection. So that's why I'm always really kind of skeptical about that interpretation, because sometimes, okay, I personally prefer it when that lychee is bright and sparkling, because sometimes when it's too sharp, I'm kind of like, I've already had that experience. I've already smelled that many, many times. It's already been done before. I prefer a sparkling lychee. I prefer a juicy, fruity, sparkling lychee. That's where my tastes are at the moment. And the lychee fragrances in my collection that I wear on a regular basis and that I talk about, those fragrances align with that theme. But when it comes to new fragrances with lychee, especially with like lychee with florals, I'm always like, okay, is it really going to be something I love? Or is it going to be something that I've just heard about, seen over and over again that I'm just not into? I feel like it's so difficult to come out with a truly unique fragrance sometimes. And that's why I'm always like really careful because I'm like, I don't want to come out with like, I don't want to have a copy in my fragrance collection unintentionally. I don't want to have like a duplicate or something that's already similar to something else. Like, I don't need that. And also, I'm not a huge fan of peach. This might be a super unpopular opinion, but whenever peach is slotted in with certain florals like osmanthus, sometimes it ends up smelling a little bit too similar to bitter peach. And again, that scent profile has already been done so many times. I don't need to introduce myself to it again. And it seems like most of the peach fragrances that are like super, I would say, mainstream that have launched are like a boozy peach. And at this point, I'm just done with boozy peaches. I'm not interested in that. It just smells too redundant to me, and it's just not something I'm into. Another fragrance note that is a little bit more new, but because it's so new to my nose, I end up being very particular about it, is papyrus. I've only smelled it in about two fragrances in my collection so far, and I've mentioned it on and off in a few videos. You might have heard me talk about how papyrus to me is like kind of like this peppery, spicy note, and I'm still like learning. Like, whenever it comes to a new fragrance note, right? I'm always learning about it. I'm always kind of testing it to see like what my preferences are regarding that particular note. And with a lesser used note like papyrus, I'm kind of like, it's not like I don't like it. It's not like I'm not going to wear it, but I'm going to proceed with a caution a little bit because I'm like, it's new and it's not something I'm super familiar with. And I like it in a certain way, but I don't always love it. So that's that on that. To my nose, it's so far, it's been like a slightly peppery, but like also not traditionally spicy. It's a really interesting note. I'm looking forward to exploring it more. But I'm also not gonna like blind buy a fragrance just because it has papyrus because of course I'm gonna want to try it out. Um, Another note that I've been familiar with for a very long time and been cautious for a very long time is cinnamon. I can think of only a few fragrances off the top of my head that I like cinnamon in. One of those fragrances is Sugar Leather by Une Nuit Nomade. That was probably the very first time I tried cinnamon, and I was like, you know what? I love this fragrance. I love this fragrance. I would wear it all the time, every which way. I would overspray it. That was the first time I had that experience with a cinnamon fragrance because when cinnamon is done in a very like smooth and well blended way, I barely smell the cinnamon and I don't smell that scratchiness of the cinnamon, then I can tolerate it. But when it's like a scratchy cinnamon, some fragrances I don't really want to overspray those fragrances because then that scratchy spiciness will come out and it's just not something I'm super into. Like I said, there's some fragrances that I love the cinnamon in there, but that still is a note that I'm going to be a little bit more cautious about because I might not love it in a lot of fragrances because sometimes they pump a little bit too much of it in there and it's just not something that I love. It's so interesting because I was like doing this video and planning for it initially and I was thinking I feel like so many other people would have had a completely different list because a lot of the fragrance notes that I'm just not into are gourmand notes. And I love gourmands, but I happen to be increasingly picky about the gourmands that I add into my collection. Speaking of, vanilla and caramel. Oh my gosh. Okay, so you might be like thinking, what? Like, why do you not like vanilla and caramel? Let me explain. I'm talking specifically about the vanilla and caramel combination because I have found, after trying hundreds of fragrances at this point, a lot of fragrances are trying to replicate the Bianco latte, caramel, and vanilla scent profile. And I don't know what anyone says. Like, I don't care what anyone says. I'm not a fan of Eclair by Lattafa. To me, it smells like a body spray. It smells like a body spray that should have been $20 instead of $60, which is what they introduced it as, or $60 to $80. And if you don't believe me, like Lattafa, they have been known, especially recently, and a lot of other Middle Eastern brands, not just Lattafa, because of the internet hype, they're starting their fragrances off at a specific price, okay? And then as the fragrance kind of like trickles out, they'll lower the price slightly, or they'll lower it maybe a few, like a little bit more. But when they first launched it, I think it was like $75 or something. It was like expensive enough that I was like, this fragrance, like the look of it is like it's a plastic bottle. It looks cheap. I'm not paying that much for it. Not when there's so many other Middle Eastern fragrances that look more expensive and they're far less. Like, no. And I'm so glad I didn't, because I got the decant of that and I was like, what is this? And I've tested Bianco Latte before and I liked it. But I'm like, there are only so many iterations you can do that have vanilla and caramel, you know. I don't like just vanilla and caramel. If a fragrance is just focusing on those two notes in a very prominent way, I'm not into that. If they add in different notes, if they do like a little bit of a twist on it, then I really start getting like, interested in that. But yeah, I'm just not like, at this point I have like three three fragrances off the top of my head that I think have vanilla and caramel. Or two that I'm thinking of right now. Like my mind is blanking at the moment, but I have Churros 71, Vanilla by Fleur, Vanilla Skin, and I know I'm probably forgetting like a few more. But that's just because like those fragrances end up like kind of being like the same style, and in my collection personally, I already have so many of them. I already have enough for me to have a go-to whenever I want that scent profile, that I don't need to add it another one. Oh yeah, another one that kind of touches on this is Naughty Noda. Naughty Noda by Snif. This is actually a version of like a vanilla that I like, because what they did here is that they combined vanilla with some like spiced ginger and citruses. So this is kind of like a vanilla frosting scent that's like different. It's not just like regurgitated with that caramel. So this is kind of like a sweet vanilla gourmand that I like, but I like vanillas and caramels too, for that matter, when they're paired with other fragrance notes that make them more unique and special, not just when they're paired next to each other and that's the fragrance. Like, I'm not into that personally. Another note that I'm not super into is Jammy Rose. And there are some fragrances, I mean, I did like a video talking about like my favorite rose fragrances, because I do think rose is such a chronically underrated fragrance note. There's some beautiful rose fragrances out there that I just love. Not every rose fragrance, in my mind, though, is created equal. My least favorite rose would be kind of like a jammy rose. Like if it smells like rose jam, I cannot handle that. I'm just not into that. I want something that smells like a little bit brighter, a little bit slightly more aromatic. I would say my favorite rose is an aromatic rose. Like a rose is like aromatic. Like Replicas on a Date, that's a beautiful aromatic rose. Love that perfume. Elizabeth and James Nirvana Rose, that's a rose with some more incense. Love that. When it's just a jammy rose and it's like super sweet, cannot do that. Not a fan. Not going to go for that. What's next? Coconut. If it's a coconut that is just focused on like that suntan lotion kind of regurgitated coconut, not into that. If it's like too creamy, like but in an artificial way, not into that. If it's coconut with other notes, then I like that. Like Melon Kiss by Navitus, that has coconut in there, or coconut water, and I really love that. I think I like coconut water more than I like straight up coconut. Just not really into the coconut unless it's done in a certain way. Again, all these fragrance notes, I have fragrances in my collection with these notes. I've gotten to the point where I'm not going to tell myself that I don't want to get a fragrance just because it has a certain note in it, but I'm just going to proceed cautiously, because number one, I might not love that fragrance and I want to try it first before I make a decision on it. And number two, I might already have so many versions of that fragrance in my collection that I do not want to spend the money or take up the space to get a fragrance that I already have somewhat similar of another fragrance to, if that makes any sense. Um, so yeah, coconut is just one of those fragrance notes that I'm like, if I see coconut, am I gonna run away from it? No. Am I going to be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, I really want to try it? Probably not. But I like it in certain cases. Um, mango. Mango is difficult to do in a unique way. There, I said it. At this point, it's like Mango Kiss by Stefan Lucas. I feel like people saw Mango Kiss and they're like, okay, let's make every single mango fragrance like Mango Kiss. And at that point, you might as well just have a few and that's it. Like, you don't need a whole selection of fragrances like that in your collection. And well, okay, this is me, my preference. Like, I don't need a whole selection of fragrances in my collection that just smell like pureed mango. Like, I like mango, but I don't love it that much. There are some new releases though in 2025 that have mango in it, but it's done in this very different way that I like. But those releases are not out yet. But so far, and I've smelled those so far, I'm just not a fan of mango. Like, if mango is like kind of like smelling like pureed mango, or it smells like mango with like osmanthus and like peachy florals, like, that's my personal preference. I'm not interested in that personally. But last but not least, pineapple. I cannot remember the last time I decided to wear a pineapple dominant fragrance willingly. I probably have been wearing pineapple fragrances, like fragrances with like a slight hint of pineapple, but there are some pineapple like fragrances in my collection that objectively smell good. They smell like canned pineapple, they smell like fresh pineapple, but I even in the summertime, okay, I have never been like, oh yeah, I want to smell like a pineapple, or I want to have a fragrance that smells like pineapple. You know? It's just personal preference. But yeah, those are the 10 fragrance notes that I'm not always a fan of. And keep in mind, I always like to have an open mind when it comes to fragrances, but I feel like a lot of the fragrance notes in this video are here because they have become so popular that brands have been pumping out release after release with these fragrance notes, and they start to kind of smell the same. That's just my experience. We can have like a whole discussion about how, oh yeah, this fragrance smells a little bit different from that fragrance. But at the end of the day, when you have a finite amount of space, when you have a budget, when you don't want to be spending so much on fragrances, it's worth, in my mind, to think about curating a fragrance wardrobe. And you can only have so many white t-shirts before it gets a little bit redundant. You can only have so many orange sweaters before people are like, okay, why don't you try another color? Why don't you try another style? And I think that same way when it comes to my fragrance collection. I'm not looking for a fragrance that smells like that smells like too many of the same fragrances in my collection. I'm looking for something unique because I'm curating a wardrobe. I don't want to be drowning in fragrances. With that being said, those are the fragrance notes that I have to share with you here today. Of course, there are going to be exceptions to this. There are going to be fragrances that have these notes that I just love, and that's totally fine. But let me know, what do you think of this video? Are there any fragrance notes that you see and you're kind of like, okay, I don't know if I'll like this one, but I'll try, but I'm not sure if I'm going to like it just because of that fragrance note. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Bye.